I'm continuing our discussion on feeding, raising, and managing goats. Contrary to popular opinion, goats don't eat tin cans. They require a nutritious diet. They have a very short GI tract, and so therefore food isn't in their system very long, and so they have to have quality forages. But they are unique grazers in that they graze and thrive on marginal land that many other animals can't thrive on. They're picky eaters. They have flexible lips so that they can pick out those tender young shoots from weeds or brambles or that sort of thing and leave the undesirable parts of the plant behind. Cows, on the other hand, aren't discriminating like a goat is, and they will pretty much eat the whole top part of the plant. Goats will consume about 3.3 to 5% of their body weight in food each day, whereas a cow normally will eat about 2%. In other words, about half what a goat does in terms of the percentage of their body weight. So it's very important on goats to have lots of forages available. They consume less when they have poor pastures, and this is why it's important to have good and plentiful pastures for them. Their consumption, their dry matter intake, is going to depend on their age, their size, and the level of production they're at. It also can relate to the weather, the goat's health, and then also the forage maturity. Goats are picky browsers, and they like woody plants best. They eat different forages than what cows do, and they also are no competition for sheep either. And so consequently, if you can graze goats with cattle, you actually will improve the utilization of the pasture by about 25%. Goats will control weeds and multiflora rows and brambles. This reduces the amount of herbicides and mowing that needs to be done. Goats that are meat goats or the fiber-producing goats are especially good at cleaning up these weedy and bramble-filled pastures. It's important to avoid overgrazing with goats because they end up consuming less feed. It allows more weeds to grow in the pasture rather than the forages. The ground may even get bare and allows erosion to occur. And then lastly, if the goats are eating the pasture off close when they overgraze, their risk of picking up worms or internal parasites are a lot greater. And the result is you have a poorer performance not only for the pasture but also for the goats. I recommend that you really plan on understocking the pasture. And this gives you a little cushion for error when, for instance, you receive less rainfall than expected and the pastures don't grow as well. And then also sometimes if the pastures are tasting good, goats are really going to consume a lot of it, and you don't want to put them out on pasture when they don't have enough to eat. The next point to consider is that fencing is very critical. I can tell you there is nothing more frustrating than putting goats back in after they get out over and over and over. I recommend a 4-foot woven wire fence with barbed wire on the top of the fence. And if not that, and you choose high tensile fence, it needs to be electrified. But before you turn goats out on a pasture with an electrified fence, they need to learn what that's about. So in a small paddock, electrify the outside fences and let the goats learn what that's about. Generally, with an electrified fence, 2 strands is all that's necessary to keep them in. Now, it's important to have a good fence charger on that fence, 4,500 volts, low amperage, and it's essential to check that fence daily to make sure there aren't any shorts from a weed or a tree branch falling on the fence and shorting the fence out so that there's no electricity to it. Next, goats must have shelter. Now, when it's nice sunny days, they're not inclined to go in. But I can tell you, if it's cold and rainy, they can handle the cold, but they won't be able to handle that combination of cold and rainy. And if your facility happens to be an old dairy facility, generally there's enough buildings and enough equipment that that'll do fine. You just have to make sure that the ventilation is good and that you keep it clean. If it's a beef cattle facility, sometimes those facilities need to be improved or renovated some. But quite honestly, I prefer these portable buildings that can be skidded from one pasture to the other to accommodate the goats. And then lastly that I want to talk about today is predators. And coyotes and wild dogs may very well attack your goats, and it won't be just one. They will attack many of them as the wild syndrome occurs with a pack of coyotes. It happens that you need a guardian animal. Guardian dogs work well. A llama or a donkey also works well for protecting your goats. But just one llama or one donkey, because if you put more than one of them out there, the llamas become friends and they ignore the goats, and the goats may get attacked in spite of it. When there's only one llama, then that llama will make a friendship with the goats and protect those goats from coyotes. Well, that's it for today, folks. I'm Doc Sanders. Next time, we're going to talk about controlled grazing and supplemental feeding. And until then, we'll see you down the road.
Down the Road is brought to you in part by Prince Agra, makers of Omnigen AF, advancing animal nutrition for healthy animals, and Woodruff Enterprise of Springfield, Ohio,